Hi, I'm Matt Hernandez, and this is Let's Chat Books. Uh, so, this episode is about episode 27. This is on a short fiction story by Carol Shields. I'm continuing with the same book of collected stories. As you can see here, I'm on, what is it, the third story perhaps? Mrs. Turner Cutting the Grass, which is also inside the short story collection called Various Miracles. So, if you are watching here on YouTube, that's kind of a miracle because so far the only people watching on YouTube are just my relatives. I'm glad if you're here, and if you're on Rumble, well, I do see that I do get a few unique viewers, so please subscribe. It would help me out tremendously. This story, Mrs. Turner Cutting the Grass, is about a girl, well, named Girlie Ferguson, or Fergus. She is from Canada, and this character had two sisters. She was the daughter of a farmer, and one day she just leaves. She moves to New York, and at the very beginning of the story, we're given kind of a humorous picture of Mrs. Turner cutting the grass. Only about the first 2 pages of a 10-page story is about, well, Mrs. Turner cutting the grass. It's supposed to look a bit humorous in the fact that she cares nothing about what she looks like as she does this. And this comes up again later on in the story, not in her cutting the grass, but just about she doesn't really care about what she looks like. I feel that somehow we're supposed to be given enough background to feel like we know how she got to this point, but I'm not so sure that that's really the case. So she runs away from home, and then she moves to New York, trying to find just the right spot where it mentions Kiki. I'll read here at the top of the page. She gets a boyfriend named Kiki, and he just abandons her after they have a kid. Then she thinks about looking for him, then she ends up abandoning her kid. I'll read a little bit from the top of page 33. Kiki was a good-hearted man, though she didn't like the beer he drank, and he stayed with her willingly for several months after she had to stop working because of the baby. It was the baby itself that frightened him off, the way it cried, probably. Leaving $50 on the table, he slipped out one July afternoon when Girlie was shopping, then went back to Troy, New York, where he'd been raised. Her first thought was to take the baby and get on a bus and go find him, but there wasn't enough money, and the thought of the baby crying all the way back on the hot bus made her feel tired. Yeah. So later on, Girlie gets married, and I mean, it feels like there's so much detail missing here. Because it says here on the top of page 35, inside was a diamond ring, delicate and glittering. Once he took Girlie on a picnic all the way up to Steep Rock, and in the woods he took off her dress and underthings and kissed every part of her body. Next paragraph. After he died, Girlie began to travel. Just like that. We're not given any kind of sense of time or anything like that. I guess they feel that the details that they've given us about the rough life she must have had and the tough decision that she had and the way she was just betrayed by her baby's father was enough to make her not care about her appearances as an adult. So later in life, her and her two sisters are able to go on a spring vacation every year. And on one of these spring vacations, she sort of gets the eye of a professor. He's going through a divorce, and then he jots notes about them. He'd go on speaking tours, but now his speaking tours become a bit about Mrs. Turner. So here, reading on page 37, this is the page that I will show here on the screen. I'll move this camera a little bit to the right. Here. He would have preferred to play his Fuji meditation or tone poem on the inner sea, but he was happy to oblige his audiences. Though he felt a day at the Golden Pavilion was a somewhat light piece, even what is sometimes known on the circuit as a crowd pleaser, people, admittedly they were mostly undergraduates, laughed out loud when they heard it. He read it well too, and a moist avuncular amateur actor's voice, reminding himself to pause frequently to look upwards and raise an ironic eyebrow. The poem was not really about the Golden Pavilion at all, but about three Midwestern lady tourists who, after viewing the temple and madly snapping photos, he talked incessantly and in loud, flat-bottomed voices about knitting patterns, indigestion, sore feet, lump breasts, and the cost of plastic raincoats and a previous trip they had made together to Mexico. They had wondered, these three noisily, repeatedly, who back home in Manitoba should receive a postcard, what they'd give for an honest cup of tea, if there was an easy way to remove stains from an electric coffee maker, and where they would go the following year. Hawaii? They were the three Furies, three witches who, for vulgarity and tastelessness, formed a shattering counterpart to the professor's own state of transcendence. He had been affronted, angered, half-crazed. One of the sisters, a little pug of a woman, particularly stirred his contempt. She, of the pink pantsuit, the red toenails, and grapefruity buttocks, the overly bright souvenirs, the garish Mexican straw bag containing dentine chewing gum, aspirin, breath mints, sun goggles, envelopes, and of saturine, and photos of her dead husband standing in front of a squat. So, the keyword being dead husband, so it would have been pretty obvious anyways, but the mention of the dead husband would mean that, of course, it was Mrs. Turner. Mrs. Turner seemed to be the most disgusting one to the professor. You know, I'm re-recording this video because before lunch, before having gone to work, and especially when I read this section on page 37, I was stuttering quite a bit and stuff, just morning tiredness. Not that I'm illiterate or something like that, even though I'm pretty sure I can still bump up my literacy skills. But I can't help but this time to laugh at this. And that is something I find kind of interesting whenever you go and read something over and over and over again, is that something kind of comes out to you. I mean, I can't help but as I keep rereading this, and me having done several tapes to make this video, that though I feel the professor is snobby and stuff and quite pretentious, and though I cannot stand this kind of pretentiousness, I think after a time, I mean, we can sort of imagine this poem in our own heads, where you would see a few lines in a poem about the beautiful scenery and then these three sisters. A beautiful scenery and these three sisters. And at some point, if this professor got every acting bone in his body activated, and he looks at his crowd of mostly undergraduates, and he speaks this poem, then he could, I'd imagine it is a bit funny. Might be a bit rude because as it says inside the next page, you know, Mrs. Turner, Girlie Turner, one of her pictures does appear in a newspaper, in a very prominent newspaper, but she probably wouldn't have known. And maybe through some of the things that have happened in her life, she just simply doesn't care. But there's another point though, right? I mean, I've lived overseas long enough. I'm not inside the most touristy town, but I did live like kind of a hotel for years. And you can kind of tell who's a tourist. I mean, there was even, gosh, should I really say this? But then at one point, down the street from where I lived was like one of those Davos conventions. And you can kind of tell like who doesn't actually live here and stuff. And, you know, isn't this what it's going to be when you go on a tour bus and you go places? I mean, if I could have the experience, you take a few pictures, you walk around, it's nice. I mean, when I was in the Navy, and some people prefer to go on tours rather than just get lost in a city and then just tell a taxi driver whenever you're just completely wasted and you can't freaking walk straight, just take me back to the ships, and they understand because, you know, whenever you go to some medium-sized city, or at least for that country, medium-sized city or kind of a big city, I suppose, and they see you and you're American, you have a particular haircut, and they just take you back. You know, I mean, aren't these kind of the antics that people do? What did this professor expect? You know? So, reading this out loud several times, I can start to see the humor inside of some of it. And it is interesting how the narration completely changed to an unnamed professor. And even the name. I mean, is this about Miss Turner cutting the grass? But also, it's called Yeah, A Day at the Golden Pavilion is not really about A Day at the Golden Pavilion, but it's just about Miss Turner cutting the grass. I do believe that Carol Shields was certainly a skilled enough writer to sort of make these metaphors, analogies, all these different literary techniques clear in her own writing about what she's trying to do, even though maybe I'm missing it just a pinch. But yeah, it's a pretty solid story. And, you know, after re-recording this so many times, I mean, hours ago I said that I did not like this story, but it's growing on me. It certainly is growing on me. And I think that's the power of rereading, and I would love to hear your opinions about this text too, and I hope that you have a wonderful day, and let's chat about this story sometime. Bye.